up, guys? Otterpop here, and welcome to another review of Dan vs. This is going to be the review for Season 1, Episode 10, Dan vs. the Salvation Armed Forces. Now, the link to the actual reaction is going to be down in the description below. This is just a little bit of a review. I finally remembered that. Let's see if I can remember it for every future episode. Anyways, quick recap of the episode. When his car is mistakenly marked as a donation, Dan does everything he can to ruin the business and get his car back. And by business, I mean the Salvation Armed Forces. It's a parody of Salvation Army, but I mean that was half obvious. But that is for later in the review. How many times am I not going to question the logic of Dan's apartment? I question his character a lot, but I also very much question his apartment so many times, one time after another. I practically say something about it in almost every single reaction. I think. I don't exactly remember, but I'm pretty sure. It wouldn't surprise me if I did. Because, for one thing, there's hardly any food in there, or at least hardly any edible food, and yet, despite the state of his apartment, he still has a working smoke detector. What? I don't know why I'm making such a big— no, I know exactly why I'm making such a big deal about it. The logistics of it, like, the logistics of a lot of cartoon logic just astounds me to no end. Whatever cartoon that I'm watching, however much I might like or dislike it, or be neutral, or whatever the case, I will always question freaking cartoon logic. Darn the scientist in me. But at least in every single episode, or at least in most episodes, Dan's personality seems to change or expand or just surprise me in all different kinds of ways. Like, when he's talking, I think, to Chris on the phone, or maybe Elise, about the Salvation Armed Forces, and he's like, I don't even know where Salvation is. It's like, no, that's not an actual army. It's a friggin' charity organization, you dolt. And when speaking of which, oh yeah, it was while him and Elise were actually having the conversation where he was like, I don't even know where Salvation is. While he and Elise were talking, he actually made a little bit of a reference to the Trojan horse, which, I mean, is something that A, most people probably wouldn't reference on a normal basis, and B, they might not even fully know the reference, but it was interesting that Dan kind of did. It's interesting what Dan does and doesn't know, honestly. But he continues to be resourceful, since he did make a copy of Chris's car key at some point. Like, all of a sudden he just whips it out. And I'm like, when and how and why did you even have the ability to do that at any point in time? Clearly not in one of the episodes, unless, you know, maybe there's like a secret little Easter egg. I don't think so. I feel like I would have noticed something like that. Then, of course, near like the end of the middle portion of the episode, Dan actually asked Chris, please. He actually says please, and I'm like, oh, so he's capable of saying please. Good job. He's also apparently capable of saying thank you, so I guess he can say both please and thank you, so yay, good for him. More than anything, there were just plenty of like little parodies and references here and there across the entirety of the episode, especially as it pertains to both war movies or heist movies. But I mean, first there's the obvious parody of, you know, Salvation Armed Forces is just a joke, a riff on the Salvation Army, which is an actual charity organization. I don't know too much about it, but I know enough. So, but then the other one was the Great Will, which is actually the Goodwill in real life. I mean, a lot of people have heard of both. They're both charity organizations that kind of do slightly different things for different reasons, but they're still both charity organizations, but obviously both are still parodies in this case. I didn't even really notice it at first, mostly because I don't know too much about the genre, but there were plenty of, like, you know, little nods, jokes, or references to a bunch of heist movies, especially in, like, the middle portion of the episode, like when, you know, Dan gets a chair from Great Will, and then Chris ends up, like, sewing him inside the chair. It was Dan's plan, Dan's choice, so it sounds weird, but it's actually not, but even though it still is. But there were inconsistencies with when people could and could not hear him talk, like, you know, cartoon logic, that's all I can explain that with. But, you know, in plenty of heist movies, you know, somebody's got to give the main character, one of the major characters, a little boost up into a secret location. Or, you know, there's a joke about there being either too much security that's easy to hack into, or a lack of security, and yet there's really not. like it seems like there's a lack of security when there's really not, which is kind of what happened a little bit with the Salvation Armed Forces episode, at least in the heist portion of the episode, where Chris and Dan went to the not encamped, but like fenced in area where the Salvation Armed Forces brings all their donations, and there's guard dogs. Guard dogs. Yeah, like that's not a common, like, heist movie, TV show, whatever trope. Even I know that. The alarms start going off and the lights start turning on as soon as they're caught. Like, even in video games that I played where there are kind of heist scenes, that always happens every single time. As soon as an individual gets caught, like, the lights start blaring and the sirens start roaring all over the place, and apparently there's an electrified fence as well. Like, seriously, you like, after rewatching it, I realized you couldn't be more obvious with all these, like, common jokes and parodies and tropes that you're just putting into this one little scene. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some, tropes and kind of references to war movies as well. That one was a slight bit less obvious to me, even after rewatch, but I think I still got the general gist of things. When Dan was talking about his initial plan to try and get back at the Salvation Armed Forces, like, he started, talking about mangled bodies of charity workers scattered everywhere and streets running red with blood, which, I mean, I feel like is almost, whether it's true or not, it's almost something that maybe a lot of, like, war movie directors, accurate or not, or, scenes involving war, like, or just scenes involving anything like that in TV, movies, and whatnot, would try to incorporate ideas or scenes kind of like that. Like, again, whether it's true or not, whether it's accurate or not, I feel like if there's any wartime event, why is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood suddenly coming to mind with Ishval? Like, I don't know why, but suddenly I'm thinking about that. I'm saying that description out loud. Mangled bodies scattered everywhere, and, streets are stone and sand and whatnot running red with blood. Like, for some reason, the extermination of Ishval from Fullmetal Alchemist is suddenly coming to my mind, and I have no idea why. Huh. Later on in the episode, Dan finds a little military-esque-ish uniform at Great Will and puts on a little hat, little suit, little beard thingamabob, and he recruits Great Will employees to, help him get back at the Salvation Armed Forces, and he gives them a big pep talk before the mission that they're supposed to undertake, which, I mean, I feel like a lot of Army generals do that. War movies are not. Dan, later on in the episode, sends somebody to bike over to Chris's house to give him a handwritten note, being all exaggerated and, talking about if he fails his mission, then Chris is gonna need to save him, which, I mean, Chris does, but I don't know. Dan using code over the radio, like, the football is in play, but just using code, and especially over a radio, like, come on. This is obvious. Again, not the typical topics or genres of, entertainment or media that I would normally pay attention to, but I think I was kind of getting the general gist of it, at least, in the middle portion with the heist, and then the later portion with the, army and generals and, war and war. I have to do a quoted war, because this is Dan we're talking about. He's not gonna wage legitimate war against anybody, even if he wants to take revenge, because he has no idea how to, because he is a moron. Sometimes. His intelligence is still impressive on a number of occasions across a number of episodes, so... And then there were a little of random things kind of sprinkled in there from time to time, too. Like, he was told by the Salvation Armed Forces cashier, Dan was, that his car was not in drivable condition, even though he's been shown to have driven it multiple times, so maybe there's a conspiracy, maybe somebody's lying to him. I don't know, it's entirely possible. But, Crunchy actually reappears. I mean, I already knew that he was going to be a recurring character. Didn't realize just how freaking often I was going to see him. This is the third job that we've seen him in. He's, had a job at the animal shelter in Animal Shelter, at the Explosive Emporium place in Traffic, and I guess now he's an employee at the Great Will. Does he just have a crap ton of jobs, or does he keep getting fired from all the jobs? I mean, it could go either way, knowing his character. And it was also something I noticed on my rewatch when Dan called Chris in the middle of the night, but Dan just hung up Chris hangs up on Dan and then turns off his phone, which I am positive that Chris told Dan that Chris would not do again. Chris said that in a previous episode. I don't remember which, but Chris said that he would no longer do that, or Dan, like, kind of forced Chris into saying that he would no longer do that, or something along those lines, but... gotcha, Chris. Gotcha, Chris. You said you wouldn't do that, but you did. You did. And then there was one voice. There was one voice. The Salvation Army guy's voice. The guy with the bell. I recognize his voice, but I couldn't figure out whose it was. I tried looking it up too, but for some reason, I just couldn't find any information. I know his voice from somewhere, but I just can't put two and two together. Watch, somebody's gonna tell me, oh, he's this guy, and I'm gonna be like, oh, I remember, I recognize him in this role, and I think these two as well. It's that kind of voice. But I'm not very good at voices, normally. I need to have seen something multiple times in order for me to kind of get a real feel and memory for their voice, but otherwise I'm just not very good with voices. But his voice, the Salvation Armed Forces guy, his voice seems like something that I would remember, that I would know from other roles, but for some reason I just can't think of it. I tried to think of other characters that his voice went with, but I came up blank every time. Somebody please tell me where his voice is from. I know his voice from somewhere. I know I do. But overall, this episode seemed a lot more tame than a lot of the previous ones that I've seen. I mean, not that that's a bad thing, and for all I know, maybe I could be absolutely mistaken, but for some reason it just didn't seem as extreme or as crazy as previous episodes, like, you know, in baseball with, you know, Dan friggin' kidnapping the commissioner. Chris and Dan going after a legitimate wolfman with a stolen bow from an archaeological site, and a silver-tipped arrow. Dan literally going to blow up an entire animal shelter with a whole bunch of animals. I mean, he eventually didn't, but he still had the idea, and he still had the dynamite, and he still blew up the whole building anyways, even after releasing the animals. Doesn't matter, it was still extreme. Getting rid of a bunch of Shakespearean actors in all kinds of crazy, convoluted ways, and, you know, just being all, you know, the evil antagonist and mysterious while doing so. Like, I don't know, for some reason, this episode, in terms of the general plan and the general feel of the episode, just felt a lot tamer than most, and I'll be honest, didn't care for it quite as much. I mean, that doesn't mean that there still weren't some interesting points from time to time, but it just, for some reason, the lack of craziness like there usually is just didn't hook me as much, and I wasn't quite as interested, but, you know, not every episode is perfect. Not every episode is. So, this review might be a little bit shorter than some of the others, but, you know, that is okay. That just means that some of the other reviews will be a little bit longer, and I'll have a lot more fun with it, and I might not have gotten all the references, or I may have been wrong about some of the references or parodies in this particular episode, but learning curve. I don't know why I feel the need to say that, but I said it. So thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction as well as the review, and I'm glad I remembered to say that the reaction was in the link in the description down below. And as usual, until the next video guys, check you laters.